So then, hello everybody. Let's see. So if you like, we could just start with a question that leads on from the last time, if there's something, before we go on with the next mental factor.
Could you explain the difference between lethargy and laziness, or are they the same?
No, so lethargy and laziness are not the same. So as it says there, so lethargy is a consciousness without workability and with heaviness of body and mind. And it prevents the realization of the object. So this one I marked myself to check. I don't know why the correctly is after the object. And so it helps to look at the opposite. So lethargy is the opposite of pliancy. And laziness is the opposite of enthusiasm. So enthusiasm is the joy in virtue. So laziness is the opposite of that, basically. And so pliancy is this. So this special quality of body and mind. So the serviceability and the lightness of body and mind that comes in conjunction with Dharma practice as the afflicted conditionings, mental and physical tendencies and conditionings become less. And then, so the body becomes more light, the mind becomes more light, and also, it has a serviceability, so it means that one can place the mind on any virtuous object for a long time. And so lethargy is the opposite of that. And so enthusiasm is the joy in virtue, and then laziness is the opposite. So there is a connection between the two, because to gain pliancy, we first need enthusiasm, because we need to practice the Dharma strongly. And then, as we said, the enthusiasm and that depends on the aspiration and faith in turn. So to work on one's faith as a basis is always a good idea. And then, of course, once one has pliancy, so then that will greatly facilitate one's enthusiasm, for example. Yes. So then we have next, excitement. And so excitement is an unpeaceful mental factor. It follows the attractive characteristics of objects and induces the mind to crave and engage external objects through focusing on previous experiences of the sense objects. Excitement obstructs the attainment of calm abiding, which is free from mental excitement and mental sinking. It belongs to the family of desire. Excitement degenerates the characteristic of firmly holding the mind. So Yeah, so excitement belongs to the family of attachment out of the different afflictions. And particularly, maybe not exclusively, but particularly the attachment for sense objects. There's a difference made between mental wandering, which comes below, and excitement. And excitement or mental excitement. So again, it's good to look at it's better to look at always at the meaning, the definition, rather than the term. So as you may know, so karma binding has two main obstacles, which are mental excitement and mental thinking. So this is one of those two. So it's good to note that out of mental wandering and mental excitement, so mental wandering is not seen. Mental wandering, as you will see, it's more coarse, and so that is not seen, interestingly enough, as one of the main obstacles. But so it's interesting that to me that it specifies mental excitement, and so mental excitement is exclusively attachment. So that is, of course, a challenge to recognize. It is a challenge to the human mind to recognize attachment as something that is unconducive. It follows the attractive characteristics of the objects and induces the mind to crave and engage external objects. Yeah, so so irrespective of whether the attractive characteristics of the objects, or whether they are nominally or not, but so the mind, sort of the mind that is attracted to these characteristics, so it wanders there without, if one leaves the mind just as it is, so that's where it will, that's where it will sort of go to automatically. And so external objects. So so that's very I think that's very important to investigate. With the meditation object, so it is said one needs to have a virtuous inner object. So to gain the benefit of meditation and to gain what is called meditative concentration, so the object needs to be a virtuous inner object. So that is very important. So it's very important to explore what is meant by a virtuous or by an inner object. So already, it's very important for us to learn to discern the difference between sense consciousness and mental consciousness. And so that we learn to meditate with the mental consciousness and do not try to meditate with the sense consciousness. So for example, one could very relaxed just try to identify the sight. One has the eyes half open, so the sight but then sound, the sounds, so the hearing of the sound, then perhaps smells or taste. And then the tactile sensations, for example, the cloth or on the, like on the skin, whether the cloth is more coarse or fine, for example, that would be tactile, or hot and cold, things like that. And then what is left over, so that is mental consciousness. So that is, I think, very useful, can be very, very, very useful meditation. And most of the things that go on in our mind, they are in the mental consciousness, but it's a little bit hard for us to identify, I think. And so our mind, is extremely engaged, strongly. Our mind strongly engages external objects. So it craves external objects, and is so more or less continuously engages with external objects, and it becomes, so for that mind also that doesn't know anything, that doesn't have so for the mind that does not have the experience of mental happiness, so then not to engage external objects, or even to engage less external objects, then can become the cause for sadness. As one can then maybe notice now during this time when one is encouraged. For example, social distancing, that already means less engagement of external objects, because it means less engagement with other people, which are external objects. And then also, as I think, as a generality, one goes out less. So there's, in that sense, also less external object. And so that can become very difficult for the mind. So so the mind, so the push towards, so the push towards external objects is very strong. So it is so strong that one will feel that if one doesn't get a daily dose of external objects, one will feel unwell. I need my hit of external objects. And so yes.
Hi, Venerable.
Hello.
Wondering what would be considered like, would it be a sense object if you're meditating and you're noticing the sensations that are happening in the body? Is that another like set of the tactile, would you say?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think one has to distinguish, generally, one has to distinguish, so a tactile sensation would be a sensation that comes about relative to the physical sense power.
Mm-hmm.
So the physical sense power, the 5 sense powers, like that, not the touch sense power. So we have 5 physical sense powers. And one of those is the touch sense power, or tactile sense power, which is explained to be spread throughout the body. But the 5 physical sense powers, so they are very specific in what objects, in relation to the objects. So for example, if one sits and one sort of thinks, it's very hot, I forgot to turn down the heating. So that would be tactile.
Mm.
That would be tactile. Or so tactile sensations generally, it's like coarse or smooth, for example, hot or cold, wet or dry. I think also that's what we identify with when we have to touch to see, whether it's wet or whether it's dry. So then, regarding generally other sort of sensations and things going on in the mind, we do have a sort of that impression. It's sort of interesting. I mean, we do have sort of that impression, that so our thoughts, etc., so that they're inside the body. That they're inside the body, which is sort of interesting because the mind is not physical. So to sort of to give a place, like a physical location to the mind. No, I'm not so sure. No, we definitely do have that perception, but anyway, it's interesting. But so inside the coarse body, we have the subtle body with the channels and the energies, and that's really where our mind resides. That's one. So in that sense, when one meditates and one thinks, if one would look at one's mental consciousness and sort of like try to identify specific thoughts, it could very well be that one thinks, oh, that is in my body, but it's not really, strictly speaking. It wouldn't be a physical sensation.
Okay, so like having awareness of the subtle body is sort of part of the mental consciousness or the mind consciousness.
Yeah, that would be part of the mental consciousness, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So for example, that is very simple meditations of just trying to visualize, for example, the three main channels. And that automatically it would become a mental engagement.
Right, it's not based on an external object of any sort. It's coming from the other.
It is an inner object.
Inner object.
And it's not an object of any of the five sense consciousnesses.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
Yes, so actually, the process of meditation in general, specifically concentrative meditation, has actually to do with sort of collecting the mind internally. So the mind that is as it says there, sort of that engages external objects, that needs to be counteracted. But in a gentle way. So these things one needs to do gentle, more for a short time rather than long times. Rather repeatedly short time than trying to have a long focus.
Venerable Fedor, I have a quick question, please, concerning the same sort of thing. When doing a lot of these visualizations and just, Shakyamuni or guru teachers dissolve into light and then flow into you. So that's not something that I would feel physically. So I don't get any kind of, say, tingling or warmth or so my body should not react to that, I guess, is my question.
Well, should or not should, that's sort of, when in meditation all kinds of things happen. But so generally, I don't know, sometimes, sometimes it helps to explain how it looks like when it's done perfectly. But that could become a little bit frightening. But anyway, like for somebody that has a calm abiding, that has actual calm abiding, any sense perception that would be regarded as mental wandering. So somebody that has, so actual calm abiding, there's a pure mental engagement. There would also be no perception of the coarse physical body, and no feeling that is generated in relative to any of the 5 physical sense powers. So the moment one sees something, the moment one hears a sound, the moment one tastes something, or so like a tactile sensation with the body, that would be already regarded as having, at least not having 100% calm abiding anymore.
Thank you.
But between our state and that, there's a long way, and so with the, with these like the visualizations. Anyway, so there's a long way, and as I said also, so sometimes we do meditations and there is something, sort of, it can look like a physical reaction, but it could be just the mind, which is, sort of resides in the body, or it could be like it could be also like a subtle physical reaction, then that would be different again. So, yeah. So when meditation, generally when we meditate, so whatever the meditation is that we set out to do, and then different things happen. If one thing or the other thing happens, so it's the more skillful way is to try not to get sidetracked by that, sort of the mind and starting to wonder, oh, what is that? And then, for example, then if one starts to conceptualize, oh, is this now physical or mental, but I shouldn't have a physical. And then already, one is on a totally different track and you can't get out of it. And so, yeah. But yeah, so these are actually all good examples also for inner objects. So the visualization, so even if you visualize the Buddha in the space in front of us, it still becomes an inner object, an inner virtuous object. Also, so then focusing the mind on one's positive thoughts. So positive thoughts and emotions that one already has, or also sort of consciously trying to generate like new positive thoughts and emotions, that would be also inner positive objects. Yes, Andy?
You said that the mind, I just want to get this right, the mind resides in the wind channels?
So the mind, so that's okay to, His Holiness once said, that's sort of like explaining the physiology of the body, so it's not secret in that way. Yeah, so one has this system of channels, and so within the channels there are the mind. So the tantric presentation of mind is that one has the clear knowing is still the mind, but it is always combined with a subtle energy. And so together they reside in the channels.
Right. And that subtle energy is...
And that is also within the physical body, yes.
And it's physical, the subtle energy?
But I don't think it's overlapping 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, yes. Yeah, so it's a subtle physical energy. It's subtle. It's a subtle matter, very subtle, extremely subtle matter.
Thank you.
Venerable,
Yes, please.
how does it, it's extremely, thank you, Venerable. How does the extremely subtle mind relate to the three bodies? Would that be the emanation body?
Or the extremely subtle. Extremely, this is getting a little bit off topic.
Oh, okay. I don't want to get us off track. It just, my mind went in that direction in terms of the subtle mind, extremely subtle, and then the three kayas.
Yeah, so the extremely subtle mind that we have anyway, so let's call it like the fundamental clear light mind. So one can also call it, like the Buddha nature, or like the Tathagata Garbha. Anyway, so that is now on the causal stage, and so it is Buddha nature. So it is mind. It is Buddha nature. So it will later transform into the Dharmakaya. But so as one of my teachers, said that it's actually, so because the clear light mind, so it is extremely pure. It's not really tainted. It's not really tainted by the afflictions, and it resides. It's inside, so like our body, but it's extremely subtle, and it is not tainted by all the more coarse minds and afflictions. And so he said that in fact one can meditate. It's actually extremely beneficial to meditate. That one has already the Dharmakaya, and is in there also one with the Dharmakaya of all the Buddhas. Is a very extremely beneficial contemplation meditation.
Thank you, Venerable.
It's sort of like, I think it's sort of, when if one looks at it technically, from a technical point of view, then one can, one says, oh, of course it is not yet the Dharmakaya. But if one looks at it from the point of view of purity, so then one can say it is already the Dharmakaya.
That would be different from an internal object then, right?
Or there would be a perfect example for an internal object.
Oh, okay. It's the opposite. Okay.
Yeah, that would be a perfect example for an internal object. Yeah.
So that's quite a lot of virtue to be able to develop that. And
yeah, it's quite a lot of. It needs a lot of merit to develop that, but it's also extremely powerful and meritorious just to contemplate it, actually.
Okay, that's
so just to visualize it and to contemplate it is extremely meritorious. Yeah.
Thank you.
So then we have to go on with the somewhat less exciting associated afflictions. So there is then non-faith is the next one. So non-faith, so that's the opposite of faith, obviously. It's a non-belief, non-faith, non-wish for virtue. It is a mental factor contrary to faith that belongs to the family of ignorance and functions as the basis for laziness. So faith functions as the basis for enthusiasm, and then non-faith irreversibly functions as the basis for laziness. And I think so one good thing to keep in mind, because it's cause and effect. So if one doesn't have strong faith, so the faculty of faith is weak, and so one has, some the faculty of non-faith is strong, or then it automatically leads to laziness. So it's because it's cause and effect. So, there are some quotes from the sutras where it says that, faith is the root of the path. So the stronger faith one has, the quicker one can progress. So then he gives some examples, like a non-faith in the law of karma, opposing the faith of belief, non-faith in the qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, lacking the characteristic of clarity, liking and opposing clear faith, and the non-faith not aspiring or wishing for liberation. So then the next one is forgetfulness. So forgetfulness, that's quite crucial. So forgetfulness is mindfulness concomitant with afflictions, which makes the mind unclear in regard to virtue and causes the mind to forget virtue by remembering the objects of the afflictions. So we could have a quick, so we could have a quick on-the-spot, spontaneous exam. Who remembers the definition of mindfulness? Without looking. Without looking. But you're better to look than to have nothing in the mind at all. Like, so with mindfulness, there are three characteristics. And as you can remember totally clearly. And so one of the characteristics of mindfulness is, so the nature of mindfulness is to not forget about the object. Out of the five, mindfulness is one of the five ascertaining mental factors. And there was this doubt mentioned. So there is this question: why are the five ascertaining mental factors? Why are they separate and not virtuous? Which is a very good question. And so I think here's also part of the answer. So, for example, mindfulness can also be non-virtuous. So if one can have a non-forgetfulness that is combined with attachment, and one doesn't forget the object of attachment or the object of anger, and it's sort of there all the time in the mind. So I think that is a really big point, and it's a point also that Lama Zopa Rinpoche sort of repeatedly makes or tries to make, so that so that mindfulness in itself actually does not make a dharma, does not make an action a dharma action. So just doing whatever one does, sort of with mindfulness. Sort of thinking, well, so I'm mindful, of this or that. So that alone, that does not make it dharma. Yeah, that is quite a big point. That is quite a big point.
Venerable, I just want to make sure that you're aware that you jumped the page.
Did I? Oh, oh, thank you. Yeah, because that's good. Thank you. Because I usually have the PDF, which is the one page below. But today I opened, I used the pages and it's side by side. So I forgot about that. Thank you. So actually it's laziness now, isn't it? So that also makes more sense. So non-faith leads to laziness. But so that's already, you know, we already answered that one. So laziness is the opposite of enthusiasm. By default. So laziness is a stagnant consciousness, not so specifically, so not attracted to virtue. Because of being attracted to sleep, socializing, and so forth. Yeah, so so there's a difference. I think there's a difference between what one would generally identify as laziness and so what is identified as laziness in Buddhism. Because so one could be, one could do a lot and not be lazy from a worldly point of view, but still be lazy from a Buddhist practice point of view. So Gyaltsabje, he says, I shall explain the antithesis that is laziness. So antithesis to Dharma practice and Dharma realization. Because with laziness, there is no practice, and without practice, there is no development and no realization. So there is the laziness that grasps at the happiness of lazing around. So just that's all. Like when, like if a person has a choice between lying down and sitting, they prefer to lie down. Or if a person has so if a person has a choice between, for example, leaning back and sitting straight upright, they prefer also to lean back, so that kind of thing. But then there's also the laziness that grasps at the negative. So so that may not be perceived as laziness initially. So for example, like a mind that is preoccupied with, like one of the major ones is wealth. So a mind that is preoccupied with wealth, so it can be very active, it can lead to a lot of action, but so from a Buddhist point of view, it is laziness. And because it is combined with attachment, so one can get this phenomenon that like a person that can be unbelievably engaged, worldly in the worldly actions, but then when it comes to Dharma, it's like they hit a wall. So they think I can just sort of then practice Dharma the same way, but it doesn't work. They hit a wall. So that's because the mind is filled, for example, with a lot of attachment. So how one can notice this is, so for example, if one has spontaneously, so one has a lot of energy for worldly activities, like going out, going to movies, etc. So one can do it for hours or no end. No one will only stop if one is actually physically too exhausted. So that kind of thing. But then, with meditation, one is already proud if one sort of, sits down for 5 minutes per day trying to generate some positive thoughts, then that's the major achievement. Or even, like even so one has the time, one has the time and the space, so one could, so one has the nice meditation seat, a nice altar, but somehow there's something in the mind, it doesn't, like for some people it's just thinking of, doing something virtuous immediately makes the mind tired. So it produces this kind of situations. So it's that kind of laziness. So generally, for example, it's good to to learn. So also for one's own well-being, for the mind, so to be more sort of collected inwards and to be focused more inwards. So that is. Yeah. And then so there are different types of laziness. There's also the laziness that puts oneself down, thinking I cannot do this. So the laziness of little self-confidence. Or like the laziness, maybe by, I don't know, little self-confidence or low self-esteem, like that kind of thing. So when one thinks, no, I can't do it. Now, how did Obama say, yes, we can? So, that laziness says, no, I can't. So I can't become enlightened, I can't do bodhicitta, I can't do this, I can't do that. So for example, if one looks at one's life and the life then maybe is sort of seemingly filled with all kinds of aspects that look like non-dharma, and then sort of the mind becomes sort of small and one thinks, oh, I could never, like become a bodhisattva, or I could never become enlightened. Like so that is then regarded also as a laziness. So then conversely, with enthusiasm, Asanga, he lists 5 types of enthusiasm. And so one of the 5 types of enthusiasm is then, it's exactly the opposite. So it's the enthusiasm of self-confidence. So that's very useful. That's very healthy to cultivate. So actually, in that sense, one should have a mind like a lion, to say. So very strong, like, be like a lion. Or a lioness. Then next comes the recklessness. Yeah, so strictly speaking, So recklessness is a mental factor that through abiding together with attachment, anger, and ignorance, or no, so through abiding within attachment, anger, and ignorance, together with laziness, does not protect the mind from contaminated phenomena, nor from meditating on virtue. Yeah, I'm not sure that's, I need to make another note there to see what that means. But anyway, so that's the main thing. It does not protect the, no one has, so strictly speaking, so the mind, so there's attachment, anger, or ignorance in the mind, and one sort of abides within that. And there's also the aspect of laziness. And so recklessness, there is sort of like, oh, I don't care. So for example, I don't care if more afflictions arise in my mind. So when it talks about contaminated phenomena, it refers to afflictions. Like sometimes, sometimes, it can be good to observe oneself. So one has certain outer objects that that are very important to one, and one will look, one will take great care. Like for example, if one has expensive designer clothes, one takes usually good care of them. So one is extremely concerned, what there's nothing fatty gets on it, and that there are no stains, and one puts them in a special bag. Like one doesn't just hang them into the cupboard, but they're put into a special bag. So one is extremely careful there. Or other things, so different things are important. For different people, different things are important. So just to notice, with these worldly things, then one notices the mind can be very obsessed, like dust on my computer or something like that. But then with our own mind, it's not like that. We don't have that same care. So, one cultivates very easily more anger, or one cultivates very easily more attachment. And so there's that kind, if one, there could be, before an action, there could be the inner weighing up, should I do it or should I not do it? And then there could be that, so, I don't care. So that would be sort of like recklessness. Or also with our karmas, so we like to keep our environment very pure, but then some people, they're very picky. So they go through their flat, everything needs to be very, very clean, no dust. But then so with the karma, when it comes to the purification of karma, then we don't take that same care. And then so it can be very useful to reflect also, with karma, I should also purify my karma in the same way to make my mind very clear, clear, my karma clean, clear. Yeah, like at the bottom of the page, so there's this quote. Sorry. So these two paragraphs. Recklessness leads to being patient with the afflictions, granting the afflictions entry into the mind. So at the time, one may think that it does not matter, as it is only for a short while. So actually, So for example, like now when we start to practice the Dharma, and one endeavors to really, so to actually change the mind, to reduce the afflictions, and to generate more positive attitudes. And then, so it could be that one notices, oh, this is actually much more difficult than I thought it would be. And so one main reason for that is because, so in the text it says one main reason for that is because one has been patient with the afflictions for a long, long time. And once one has been patient with the afflictions for a long time, one lets them into one's mind. And at the time, for example, if the mind inside sort of one considers, should I generate anger towards that person or not? And then there can be that situation where the mind inside thinks, oh, it's just for now. Like, just for now I generate anger. But it's very deceptive because then once the affliction sort of has been granted entry into the mind, it sort of stays there. It's incredibly hard to get it out. So, so if you analyze actually our own mind and our experiences, then we can notice that sometimes, so these afflictions, they tend to stay for a long time, even decades after they're still there. So when maybe one was in this situation, one sort of was weighing up, so should I practice love and compassion or anger? And then one went to the side of anger. But one sort of thought, it's just now because the situation is just momentary and then it will be gone. But then, 10 years later, 20 years later, so if one checks one's mind, so that resentment, so that anger towards that person is still there. So Shantideva, so your boss, so he warns a lot. In his text, the introduction to the introduction to the Bodhisattva's way of life, and that is almost like a mantra. Don't let afflictions into your mind. And you see, we need to make a determination, you see, to free the mind from the afflictions. So that is very important. If we don't make a determination to free the mind from an affliction, so the affliction, it will not go away by itself. So I know there are meditation, techniques and so, so they advertise that, but that's not really true. Because if you think about it, well, how much time have they already had to go away? But they didn't go away. So if you sit there further, in the 7-point posture, why should they now all at once go away? They have had already 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, but they don't go. So it's very good. It's very good to investigate these issues, so to compare it with one's personal experience. Because as we said earlier, in the context of the 11 virtuous mental factors, so there is this situation with the virtuous mental factor of equanimity. So there is this situation with the higher stages of karma abiding, but there the mind, is basically actually free from manifest afflictions, and the mind is incredibly, the virtuous side is incredibly powerful. And then there, if an isolated affliction arises in the mind, then on that level, so the yogi, all that the yogi has to do is just to recognize it and then sort of to wish it, or sort of like just to want it to go away. And then it dissolves back into the ocean of consciousness. So that does exist, but it's sort of advanced. And so for oneself, I sort of think that the Dharma practice, it should be also practical. So, so if whatever one is doing, so if the affliction does not go away, then it's not practical to continue that. So in the instructions on meditation, it says, so if one is not able to rectify the affliction simply by returning the mind to the virtuous object with mindfulness, then one needs to let go, one needs to change object and address the affliction specifically with the antidote. And then, only then, when one was actually able to reduce that affliction, then one can return to the main object. Yes, please.
Yeah, Venerable, would then somehow the discussion of recklessness brings to me grief. So in a way, would grief be a certain way, a certain recklessness in a way? Grief coming from attachment, and then we allow it to come in our mind and could stay with us forever. So I'm maybe a little confused here, but can we talk about what grief is in relationship to recklessness?
Well, isn't grief more like a sadness?
Well, yes. Grief is like, having lost someone, having lost something is part with attachment. It's sadness for sure. But the definition of recklessness.
Well, because I'm thinking also grief. So because of a lack of time, so I didn't plan to do the 4 changeable mental factors, but one of them is regret. And so they are changeable because they can be, through the motivation, they can be virtuous or non-virtuous. And so I think it's the same with grief. So for example, bodhisattvas experience grief, but it's not based on attachment. So for example, if they see a decline of the Dharma, they experience grief. I think also, like a bodhisattva will experience grief, like if a teacher passes away, maybe not based on attachment, but because there's less benefit for sentient beings, so the bodhisattva experiences grief. So grief can be, I think grief could be also virtuous, so it depends. It's not necessarily based on attachment. But, so I think, grief, yeah, so, but yeah, so it is the same, I guess, so grief in relation to attachment as one normally knows it. So I think it is the same. So one needs to be careful, with these things. So once one lets it into one's mind, anything like an affliction that's related to an affliction, once one lets it into the mind, it's really very difficult to get it out. Once, like a very simple example, if the neighbor is noisy, for example, and one allows oneself to get angry at the neighbor, so one allows anger to arise at the neighbor, so one sort of doesn't practice patience, sort of makes an effort to keep the mind free from the anger, but one allows the anger to arise, then the anger is in the mind, so it's a big problem. It's actually a bigger problem than before. And now one has also the urge to act on the anger because the anger is in the mind. And then sort of to consciously, get the anger out of the mind, like, some kind of method. That's incredibly difficult. So that's very challenging, even with such a small instance. So, yeah, so also with grief, I guess, our beginner stage is we are still, what one calls ordinary individuals. So, a certain measure of grief is probably normal if somebody close by passes away. But so one needs to take care, I guess, long term, that it doesn't poison one's mind, one's life. Maybe not poison, but if it becomes debilitating. I guess always one question that is maybe always very useful to ask with these kind of grief or also other afflictions is always this meditation, because there could be is it does it have any benefit for oneself or others? For example, with grief, there could be the impression that it would be somehow bad if one wouldn't grieve. And so one could ask, well, is there really any harm, first of all, not to grieve to the other person, and also generally for sentient beings? Is it more beneficial than to not have the grief or to have the grief? If the grief becomes debilitating, then it definitely becomes, it's more beneficial not to have the grief. It's sort of like, I don't know, when my teacher Lama Lundu passed away, I sort of thought the grief is sort of like, it's also selfish, because it's more based on our own loss. It's not so much concerned with the other person. When we grieve, like if somebody normal passes away, so then from a Buddhist perspective, so they go on to a new life, possibly very difficult. So we grieve, but then if you look at the motivation for the grief, it's more because we have the loss. We're not sort of concerned with them, making prayers for them that they have a good rebirth and do mantras and practices for them, but we're sort of, the grief is because we experience the loss, so it's really selfish, based on self-cherishing. But the experience, it's good to be, there's always the difference. I mean, one is still an ordinary individual, so probably not to experience some grief that would not be normal. But one needs to be careful. So then we come to forgetfulness and non introspection. So that is very easy. So that is very interesting to me. For example, so forgetfulness is mindfulness concomitant with an affliction. So as you remember, we were saying that this relationship between the main mind and the mental factors, so we always have one main mind in the center, and then it is accompanied by different mental factors. And so the one group of mental factors that is always there are the 5 ever-present mental factors. So they're sort of like the core gang. So sometimes I like to think of the relationship between the main mind and the mental factor is sort of like the boss and the other gang members. You rarely see them alone, really. So that's why they feel strong, because there are always many of them. And so like and so one has the main mind and the mental factors. So they're like the core. So they're always together. They're ever-present mental factors. And then there can be other mental factors too, a lot of them. So here, what one would have also in the mix then additionally would be an affliction, for example, anger or attachment, and mindfulness. So how that would look practically in one's mind is, sort of like the situation that one cannot let go of one's anger. So this non-forgetfulness, of the anger, the non-forgetfulness of the object of the anger, it just stays there in the mind continuously. So that's that. And it's very interesting. So why is it labeled forgetfulness? Because it makes us simultaneously forget a certain amount of Dharma. It takes our mind away from the Dharma. So that's why it's called forgetfulness. Yes, so as it says there. So what one really needs is a mindfulness of a positive object. So that is really what one needs. So when we want to change the mind, it's not so conducive to actually focus on what one wants to change, but it's more conducive to sort of so for example, instead of sort of focusing on the negative thoughts and then sort of wanting to change them, like bending a piece of wire, it's better. So like one type of meditation can be, one directs the mind inwards. So just analyzing, for example, what is going on in the mind. So then, there can be negative things, there can be positive things. So sometimes the negative things, they are stronger. So then one method can be so one sort of, what's the word? Sort of more like to recognize, so there's that, and there's that. But then, so not to get caught up, in the negative thoughts, but directing the mind, so looking, what are the positive things that are going on in my mind? Like the positive aspects. Like elements of love and compassion, for example. So for whom do I have love and compassion? So to direct the mind, onto the or bodhicitta. So to direct the mind onto the positive things that are going on in the mind, one's Dharma understanding, and then also to consciously try to produce new positive thoughts. So in best case, so in line with the instructions from the Lamrim, so to produce this inner sort of paths of positive thought. And you see, so that in the moment one has generated a new positive thought, you see that whether one wants it or not, so that will automatically benefit the rest of the mind. It's cause and effect. And so to put it simple, the more positive thoughts automatically, so the less negative thoughts. And then, so for example, like Pabongka Rinpoche, one way to meditate is he recommends to reflect on something that actually moves the mind, where one knows, or that will make my mind move. I don't know, it could be too drastic, but like one of the things he recommends is to reflect on animals at the butchers or in the slaughterhouse. Anyway, something where one knows, or that will make my mind move into a positive direction. And then, so that actually, one has like an instance of love and compassion in the mind, and then one can expand on that, expand that. So then in this way, by keeping the focus on the mindfulness, so on the positiveness, we can be also wisdom. It's good to be flexible, like if one wants to reflect, reflecting a little bit on karma, or reflecting a little bit on different aspects of dependent arising, or the kindness of others. So that automatically there will be less afflictions in the mind, and so one feels automatically at least a little bit better, for example. And then so through repeating, so it doesn't need to be very long, you see. It doesn't need to be like a mega meditation of 1 hour or 45 minutes. So one can just do this if one has a quiet moment, for 5 minutes. But then so to take care, that one uses sort of quiet moments in this way repeatedly, for example, throughout the day, then it's very skillful. And then so through the repetition, so that inner path that one generates, so through the repetition, so it becomes stronger and clearer and broader, and it stays there more and more. And then throughout the day, you see, that is the function actually of, the positive function of mindfulness. So to keep it there, so to recall it, and so to remember that positive thought or emotion, and so keep it in the mind with mindfulness. And so the trick is, you see, through that, so that's the basic, so the basic principle. So the more Dharma, the more positiveness, so the less negativeness automatically. So one then doesn't need to go, to the negative side and count. But as soon as one does that, the mind is again engaged into the negative things. So that's what one doesn't want. So, and we have so the next one, so non introspection. So non introspection is a discriminating awareness. So it's a type of wisdom co-joined with afflictions, the same again. So hence it is an afflicted wisdom that engages in the doors of into the actions of the 3 doors without being aware whether they are suitable or not. And so the opposite, introspection is the kind of wisdom that can discern a beneficial action, like beneficial action from an unbeneficial action. Or in simple terms, that can distinguish right from wrong, beneficial from non-beneficial, and so forth. So actually our introspection increases as our Dharma knowledge increases. So non-introspection is an afflicted wisdom, and forgetfulness is afflicted mindfulness. Then we have a distraction. So the good old friend, distraction. So mental wandering, taking the mind away from virtuous objects due to the power of afflictions. But so that is more general. So it can be attachment objects, anger objects, ignorance objects. And the other one, excitement, mental excitement, that is specifically attachment. And so specifically to external objects. Like one common experience that practitioners have is that they get the impression that there are more afflictions in my mind than before. Like before I started to practice the Dharma, and I started with all of that, I had no afflictions. Now I have more afflictions. But so the reality is, of course, that one becomes more focus on positive virtuous objects. So the non-virtuous side becomes more clear. There's this yogi, Gyalwa Sapa, one famous yogi from Tibet. And when he went the first time, I guess, into like an isolation, into a retreat, into a hermitage. And so he had exactly this experience. So he thought, that is really very weird. Now I'm here in the hermitage, but my mind seems more distracted than before. And so after some time, so he consulted his teacher, and so his teacher told him, well, you see, the problem is so that physically you went into the hermitage, but mentally you took the whole village, with you, because it was more a village situation than a big town situation in Tibet most of the time. And that's actually it, isn't it? I don't know, would you have questions? Maybe some questions that you have to these points?
Venerable, I have a general question.
Sure.
I've really, really enjoyed this class and have gotten a lot out of it. I'm wondering if you're planning on teaching any online classes in the future, and as an add-on question, what books would you recommend if we'd like to study this further?
Like to study this particular topic further?
Yeah, the mind and mental factors.
So you could read. So anyway, so the book that I think that got sent to you, that is sort of like what I put together
Yeah, that's great.
from classical sources.
Mhm.
Then more elaborate maybe, and also a little bit different at times from the point of view of what is included. There is the actual text for the module is a text that is by an author that is called Geshe Gyaltsen, one Lama. That has been translated into English. That could be one way to expand. So that is part of the basic program material. So I don't know if the center has this on file and can send it to you, or I can send it and then they pass it on, something like that.
Thank you, Venerable. I was looking at the basic program because they do have the mind and mental factors classes you're mentioning, so I can look at that, refer to it, and if not, maybe get in touch with you.
Yes. Then also because it's, I guess, reading these things, that can be of course, like reading the root text itself just alone. So I don't know how enlightening that is. It could be quite difficult actually.
Mhm.
So there is some anyway. So it is I think also offered as online module.
Yes.
By the BP, the FPMT. I could also offer you some recordings, from when we did this module in Kopan.
Oh, that would be great.